The cabin lights dimmed as Flight 447 began its descent into Atlanta, and that's when the screaming started. Not the frustrated cry of a tired toddler or the whimper of a child with ear pressure. This was different, raw, guttural. The kind of sound that made every passenger freeze mid-conversation, made hands grip armrests, made mothers pull their own children closer without thinking. The kind of sound that reminded you that 30,000 feet in the air, trapped in a metal tube hurtling through darkness, you were more vulnerable than you ever wanted to admit. In first class, behind the curtain that separated those who paid extra from those who didn't, a boy of maybe 7 years old thrashed against his seat belt with a violence that seemed impossible for someone so small. His face had gone crimson, veins standing out against his temples like angry rivers. Spit flew from his mouth as he shrieked words that dissolved into incoherent noise. His small hands clawed at his throat, at the air, at nothing and everything simultaneously. His father, a man in a suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, gripped the boy's shoulders and tried to force him still. The man's Rolex caught the overhead light as he struggled, a flash of gold against navy fabric. His face was tight with frustration and something else. Fear, maybe, or embarrassment. The kind of emotion that men like him learned early to mask with anger. But the child was somewhere else entirely, somewhere unreachable. His eyes rolled back, showing too much white. His small fists pounded against the leather seat, against his father's chest, against the window that showed nothing but darkness and distant city lights that looked like fallen stars scattered across invisible earth. "Someone help him," a woman whispered from 2 rows back, her magazine forgotten in her lap, her glass of wine trembling in her hand. But no one moved. What could they do? The flight attendants had already tried. They'd offered water in plastic cups, crackers in small packages, a warm blanket from the overhead compartment. The father had waved them away each time with barely concealed contempt, insisting his son was fine, that he just needed a moment, that they should mind their own business and do their jobs. His voice had carried that particular tone of the wealthy when confronted with service workers. That mixture of dismissal and irritation that suggested he'd never once considered that other people might know something he didn't. Now the boy was choking on his own breath, his small body convulsing as panic consumed him completely. His skin had taken on a grayish tinge beneath the red, and his lips, those small, perfect lips, were turning the faint blue of winter twilight. And in row 17, in the last seat of economy class near the bathroom that smelled faintly of blue chemical cleaner and recycled air, a girl of 12 sat perfectly still. Her name was Zara, and she'd learned long ago that stillness was a kind of invisibility. That if you made yourself small enough, quiet enough, kept your eyes down and your voice soft, the world might forget to hurt you for a little while. She wore a jacket 2 sizes too big, inherited from a cousin she'd never met, the cuffs frayed where someone else's nervous fingers had worried the threads. Her hair was pulled back in neat cornrows that her grandmother had braided 3 days ago, back when grandmother could still remember who Zara was. Back before the strokes had stolen most of her words and left only fragments of the woman who'd raised her. The braiding had taken 4 hours, and her grandmother's hands had trembled the entire time, but she'd insisted on finishing. "You need to look nice," she'd said, her accent thick with memory and medication. "You need to remember you're beautiful, even when the world tries to tell you different." Zara had been returning from that hospital in Miami. The charity hospital with fluorescent lights that flickered and hallways that smelled like disinfectant trying to cover something worse. The hospital where they'd done everything they could with the nothing they had, where the doctors had kind eyes and gentle voices when they explained that sometimes the body just gives up. That sometimes love isn't enough to keep someone here. That death comes for everyone eventually, and the best we can do is make the leaving as painless as possible. Her grandmother had exactly $48 in her bank account when she died. Zara had found the statement tucked into her Bible, the King James Version with the cracked leather cover and pages soft as tissue from decades of reading. Along with the statement was a note written in shaking cursive that said only, "You are stronger than you know. Your mind is your inheritance. Don't let them make you small." The funeral had been small. Just Zara and 3 women from her grandmother's church. Women with silver hair and strong voices who sang hymns that made the cheap funeral home feel almost sacred. They'd hugged Zara afterward, pressed 20s into her hand with whispered blessings, and then they'd gone back to their own lives because grief, no matter how genuine, can't pay anyone's rent. The foster family who'd taken Zara in afterward did it for the monthly check. She understood that. She wasn't naive. They weren't cruel exactly, but they weren't warm either. They gave her a room in the basement, the one with the small window near the ceiling that showed only passing feet and car tires. They fed her the leftovers from dinner, the dried-out chicken and congealed mashed potatoes that no one else wanted, and they reminded her often that she should be grateful. That plenty of kids had it worse, that she was lucky someone wanted her at all, so she'd learn to be small, learn to be grateful. Learn to keep her face neutral even when the other kids at school whispered about her clothes, her silence. The way she brought the same peanut butter sandwich every single day, because asking for lunch money felt like admitting she was charity, and charity had to know its place. But Zara had something they didn't know about, something her grandmother had given her before the sickness took her completely. Her grandmother had been a nurse once, back in Jamaica before she'd immigrated with dreams of a better life, before the system had refused to recognize her credentials, before she'd spent 30 years cleaning other people's houses instead of saving their lives. 30 years scrubbing toilets and mopping floors and biting her tongue while women who couldn't spell, pneumonia, asked her to use less bleach because it bothered their allergies. Still, she'd taught Zara everything. Late at night, when the pain medication made her lucid for a few precious hours. When the tremors in her hands quieted enough to turn the pages of old medical textbooks she'd kept hidden in her closet like treasures, she'd quiz Zara on symptoms and treatments. On how to read a person's breathing, their color, the dilation of their pupils. On how to stay calm when everyone else was panicking, because panic was contagious and composure could save lives. On how to see past the surface of things to the truth underneath. "Knowledge is the only thing they can't take from you," she'd said, her voice rough from the breathing tube they'd removed that morning. "They can take your home, your money, your dignity. They can look at you and see nothing. But what you know, what you learn, what you carry in your mind, that's yours forever. Learn everything, remember everything. Your mind is your inheritance, and it's worth more than gold. Now 30,000 feet in the air." Zara listened to the screaming from first class and recognized something the adults around her had missed. This wasn't a tantrum. This wasn't a spoiled child acting out. This was a medical emergency. She could hear it in the quality of the screams, the way they were becoming weaker, more desperate, losing their force as the boy's body struggled for oxygen it couldn't properly absorb. She could see it in the flight attendants' faces as they whispered urgently into their communication devices, their professional smiles cracking into something like fear. Their training manuals having never prepared them for this exact situation. She noticed the way the boy's father had stopped trying to restrain him and was now looking around with the lost expression of someone who'd always had money solve his problems but didn't know what to do when it couldn't, when all his wealth and status meant nothing in the face of his child's suffering. Zara unbuckled her seat belt with fingers that wanted to shake but wouldn't let themselves. The woman next to her, who'd been pretending to sleep for the last hour to avoid conversation, opened one eye. She was middle-aged, wearing a tracksuit that had probably never seen a gym, and she smelled faintly of airport wine and hand sanitizer. "You need to stay seated, honey. We're landing soon." "It's not safe." But Zara was already standing, already moving up the aisle with that careful walk you learn when you're used to navigating spaces where you're not entirely welcome. Other passengers watched her with mild curiosity, then dismissal. Just a kid going to the bathroom, just another body moving through space. Nothing to see, nothing important. She reached the curtain that divided the cabin. The fabric was thick, expensive, meant to maintain the illusion of separation. The fantasy that some people deserved more space, more comfort, more consideration than others. On the other side, she could hear chaos. The boy's screams had turned to choking gasps, wet and terrible. Someone was crying. A man's voice kept repeating, "Do something, Goddammit, do something," over and over like a prayer to a god who wasn't listening. Zara pushed through. The first-class cabin fell silent in the way rooms do when something completely unexpected happens, when the established order shifts and no one knows quite how to react. Every face turned toward her. A man in a business suit lowered his phone. A woman in yoga pants stopped mid-sip of her cocktail. Two flight attendants froze in the aisle, their mouths slightly open. The boy's father looked up from where he was cradling his son, his expensive tie loosened and askew, his face shining with sweat. His eyes moved over Zara in one quick assessment and found her wanting. She could see it happen, the way his gaze took in her cheap jacket, her worn sneakers with the sole starting to separate, the obvious poverty of her presentation, and dismissed her as irrelevant. As less than, "Get back to your seat," he said. His voice carried the absolute certainty of someone used to being obeyed, someone who'd never had a command questioned. "This doesn't concern you." Zara didn't move. She was looking at the boy, at the blue tinge creeping into his lips like frost spreading across a window, at the way his small chest heaved with effort, pulling in air that his panicked body couldn't properly use, at his fingers, which were pressed against his throat in the universal gesture of choking, except he wasn't choking on food or a toy or any physical obstruction. He was choking on air that wouldn't come, on lungs that had forgotten how to work, on fear so overwhelming it had become a physical thing crushing him from the inside. "He's having a panic attack," Zara said quietly, her voice steady despite the hammering in her chest, despite every instinct screaming at her to turn around, to go back to her seat, to remember her place. "A severe one. He needs help now or he's going to pass out." The father's face darkened like a storm cloud. "I don't remember asking for your medical opinion. I said get back to your seat." Now, a flight attendant appeared at Zara's shoulder, her smile strained to the breaking point, her hand reaching out to gently guide Zara away. "Sweetie, you really need to return to economy. This is a first-class area, and we have protocols for situations like this." "I'm sure you mean well, but—" "His lips are turning blue," Zara continued, her voice still calm, still steady, channeling every lesson her grandmother had ever taught her about projecting confidence even when you felt none. "He's hyperventilating. His carbon dioxide levels are dropping too fast. When you hyperventilate, you expel too much CO2, which causes the blood vessels in your brain to constrict. If someone doesn't help him regulate his breathing in the next 60 seconds, he's going to lose consciousness. And if he loses consciousness while he's still in this state, he could stop breathing entirely." "Oh, for Christ's sake," the father snapped, his voice rising. He looked at the flight attendant with the expression of a man who'd reached the absolute limit of his patience. "Can you please remove this child? My son is having a medical crisis and I don't need some random kid playing doctor. Where did she even come from? How did she get past the curtain?" But another voice cut through the tension. Older, calmer, carrying the kind of authority that made everyone, including the boy's father, pause and turn. "Let her speak." The woman who'd spoken sat 3 rows up, in a window seat that probably cost more than Zara's entire flight. She was black, elegant, somewhere in her 60s, with silver hair cut close to her head, in a style that was both practical and beautiful. She wore a simple black dress and a single strand of pearls that looked real, not costume jewelry, and when she stood up, she carried herself with the kind of authority that couldn't be bought or faked. It was the authority of someone who'd earned every inch of respect they commanded. "What's your name, sweetheart?" she asked Zara, her voice gentle but firm. "Zara, and how do you know what's happening to this child, Zara? Are you a doctor?" "No, ma'am, my grandmother was a nurse, she taught me." "I've seen panic attacks before." Zara's eyes never left the boy, who was now slumped against his father's chest, his breathing rapid and shallow, his skin taking on a waxy quality that made her stomach clench with fear. "I've studied them, I know what to do, but we need to act now." The father laughed, but it was a brittle sound with no humor in it, the laugh of a man who couldn't quite believe what he was hearing. "You've got to be kidding me. My son needs real medical attention, not folk remedies from some." He stopped himself, but everyone heard what he hadn't said. Everyone in that cabin understood the words that had died on his tongue, the implications hanging in the air like smoke. The elegant woman's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her eyes, something hard and cold and utterly unforgiving. "You were saying?" she asked softly, and there was steel beneath the silk of her voice. The father's jaw worked. He looked around the cabin, perhaps hoping for support, for someone to agree that this was ridiculous, that he was right to be angry. But the other passengers were watching him with expressions ranging from discomfort to disgust. "I'm saying my son needs a real doctor," he said, but his voice had lost some of its certainty. "Not a child. Especially not," he gestured vaguely at Zara, a wave of his hand that encompassed her cheap jacket, her worn sneakers, her blackness, everything about her that marked her as other, as less than. As not belonging in this space where important people dealt with important problems. "I see." The woman turned to Zara and her expression softened. "What do you need, sweetheart? A paper bag if you have one, or I can use cupped hands to create a rebreathing space. But I need him to trust me, and I need everyone else to back up and give us space." Zara took a step closer to the boy, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. "He's scared. All this attention, all these people crowding around, it's making it worse. Panic feeds on panic. My son doesn't need some ghetto kid putting her hands on him," the father said, and this time he didn't bother to hide the venom in his voice. Didn't bother to couch his prejudice in polite language. "I don't know what you're trying to pull here, what kind of scam this is, but—" The boy made a sound then. A weak, desperate wheeze that cut through everything else, through the father's anger and the tension and the uncomfortable silence. His eyes were half closed. His body had gone from thrashing to limp, the kind of limpness that meant the brain was shutting down non-essential functions to preserve itself. Zara didn't wait for permission. She dropped to her knees beside him, ignoring the father's sharp intake of breath, ignoring the flight attendant's protest, ignoring everything except the child in front of her who needed help. Her hands moved to cup in front of his face, creating a small space just like her grandmother had taught her. "Hey," she said softly, her voice cutting through the panic like something solid he could hold on to. "My name is Zara. I know you're scared. I know it feels like you can't breathe, like you're dying. But you're not, I promise you're not. Your body is just confused right now, and I'm going to help you fix it, okay?" The father reached for her, his hand closing on her shoulder to pull her away. But the elegant woman stepped between them with a speed that belied her age. "Don't," she said quietly. It was one word, but it carried the weight of absolute command, the unspoken promise of consequences if he didn't comply. His hand fell away. Zara kept talking, her voice low and steady, every word deliberate. "I want you to breathe into my hands, just like this. Watch me," she demonstrated, breathing slowly, deliberately, making each breath visible and countable. "In through your nose for 4 counts, hold for 1, out through your mouth for 4 counts. Into my hands. The air bouncing back will help balance your CO2 levels. I promise this will work, but I need you to trust me. Can you do that?" The boy's eyes, glazed with terror and starting to lose focus, found hers. They were brown, she noticed. A warm brown like her grandmother's had been. For just a moment he seemed to see her, really see her, not as a stranger or an intruder, but as someone trying to help. He tried to speak, but no sound came out except that terrible wheeze. "Don't talk," Zara said quickly. "Don't try to explain or ask questions, just breathe, copy me, watch my chest, see how it moves, in, out, slow and steady, you can do this." "I know you can." She cupped her hands closer to his face, creating a small space for him to breathe into, letting the reflected air increase his carbon dioxide intake. Slowly, agonizingly, his gasping breaths began to follow her rhythm. It wasn't smooth. He kept breaking the pattern, panic pulling him back toward hyperventilation. But Zara stayed with him, her voice never wavering, her hands steady. "That's it," she murmured. "You're doing great. I know it's hard, I know it's scary, but you're doing it. Keep going, in, out, in. Out, you're okay. I've got you, I'm not going anywhere." Around them, the cabin had gone completely silent. Every passenger in first class was watching, frozen in place. The flight attendants stood like statues, their professional training useless in the face of this strange reversal where a child in a cheap jacket was doing what they couldn't. Someone had taken out their phone and was recording, though Zara didn't notice. She was entirely focused on the boy, on the subtle changes in his breathing, on the slow return of color to his lips. It took 3 minutes. 3 minutes of Zara breathing with this boy she'd never met. 3 minutes of her steady voice pulling him back from the edge of panic. 3 minutes of her refusing to acknowledge the father's furious stare, or the whispers that had started up behind her, or the fact that her knees hurt from kneeling on the hard floor. 3 minutes that felt like 3 hours, Finally, the boy took a full breath, then another. His color returned, pink flooding back into his cheeks like sunrise. His eyes cleared, focusing properly for the first time since the attack began. His body relaxed into the seat, the terrible tension draining away. "Better?" Zara asked softly. He nodded and a single tear rolled down his cheek. "Good, you did so well. Keep breathing like that, okay? Slow and steady. Your body knows what to do now. You're safe." Zara stood up slowly. Her legs were shaking, her knees screaming from kneeling on the hard floor, but she kept her face calm. She turned to leave, to disappear back through that curtain into economy where she belonged, where no one would look at her like she was something that had crawled in from outside. Something that didn't belong. "Wait," the elegant woman's voice stopped her. "What's your full name?" "Zara Mitchell." "And you're traveling alone?" Zara nodded. The woman exchanged a look with one of the flight attendants, some silent communication that Zara couldn't read, but that made the attendant's eyes widen slightly. Then she reached into her purse, an expensive leather bag that probably cost more than 3 months of foster care payments, and pulled out a business card. "I'd like to speak with you after we land if that's all right," she said, handing the card to Zara. "Would that be okay?" Zara took the card. The name on it said Dr. Margaret Ockhaffer, and beneath that, Chief of Pediatrics, Children's Hospital of Atlanta. Beneath that, a phone number and email address embossed in silver that caught the light. Zara didn't know what to say. Her throat felt tight. "You saved that boy's life," Dr. Ockhaffer said simply, and there was no exaggeration in her voice, no dramatics, just fact. "Or at the very least, you prevented a very dangerous situation from becoming catastrophic. That deserves more than a thank you." The father had recovered his voice. "Now hold on just a minute." His face was flushed again, but this time with something that might have been shame mixed with defiance. "I don't know what you people are trying to pull here, but my son was having a medical episode, and this child could have made it worse. She had no right to touch him. I'm going to be filing a complaint with the airline. In fact, I should sue. You allowed an unaccompanied minor to interfere with a medical emergency in first class. My lawyers are going to have a field day with this." Dr. Ockhaffer turned to face him fully, and when she spoke, her voice could have frozen water. "Your lawyers," she said, "will be very interested to know that I witnessed the entire incident, that I am a licensed medical doctor with 30 years of experience in pediatrics, that I hold a position on the board of this airline, that this young woman correctly identified your son's condition, administered the appropriate intervention, and potentially saved his life while you stood there and did nothing but hurl insults and reveal the full extent of your character. You were about to what, Doctor?" Ockhaffer's voice cut through his protests like a scalpel. "You've been about to help your son for the last 10 minutes. You waved away every flight attendant who offered assistance. You refused to let them call for a doctor over the intercom. You were too proud, too arrogant, too certain that you could handle it yourself." She paused, and the silence that followed was devastating. "And when someone who actually knew what to do tried to help, you dismissed her because of the color of her skin and the price of her jacket. Don't insult me by pretending otherwise. We all heard what you said, what you almost said, what you would have said if you thought you could get away with it." The cabin was so quiet you could hear the engines humming, could hear someone's nervous breathing 3 rows back. The father's face had gone from red to white. I never. You're twisting my words. I was concerned for my son's safety. I didn't know who she was. She could have been anyone. She was someone trying to help, and you tried to stop her." Dr. Ockhaffer's expression didn't change. "Then please explain to me and everyone here exactly what you meant when you said your son didn't need some ghetto kid touching him. I'm very interested in hearing your explanation." Silence. A woman in the row behind them cleared her throat. "I heard it too," she said quietly, her voice shaking but determined. "I heard everything he said." "As did I," an older man added, lowering his newspaper. "Same," someone else murmured. "I got it on video," a younger woman said, holding up her phone. "The whole thing?" The father looked around at the faces watching him, and for the first time seemed to realize that his wealth, his suit, his first-class ticket, his presumed authority couldn't protect him from this. That whatever power he was used to wielding didn't work when a dozen witnesses had watched him put his pride above his son's life. had heard him reveal the ugly prejudice that lived beneath his expensive veneer. "My son is fine now," he said, but his voice had lost all its certainty, had become something smaller and defensive. "I'm grateful for the assistance, but I think we're all overreacting here. Making too much of. Your son nearly lost consciousness from a panic attack that you were too stubborn to address properly," Dr. Ockafer said. "And when a trained individual tried to help, you attempted to physically remove her. You insulted her, you diminished her, you made assumptions about her worth based on her appearance." She paused. "If I were you, I'd spend less time worrying about lawsuits and more time wondering why your 7-year-old is having panic attacks severe enough to require emergency intervention. That's not normal. That's a sign of serious distress that you, as his father, should have recognized and addressed long before it got to this point." The boy, who'd been silent through all of this, his breathing now steady, suddenly spoke. His voice was small and hoarse, barely above a whisper, but in the quiet cabin everyone heard him. "I don't want to go." His father looked down at him and something cracked in his expression. "What? I don't want to go to St. Andrews. I told you. I told you 100 times I don't want to leave home. I don't want to go to boarding school." Tears spilled down the boy's face, dripping onto his polo shirt. "But you never listen. You just keep saying I'll be fine, that it's a good school, that I need to toughen up, that I need to stop being weak. But I'm not weak, Dad. I'm scared. I'm really, really scared." "And you won't listen." The father's expression crumbled. For just a moment, the arrogance fell away completely, and there was only a man looking at his terrified son and finally seeing him. Really seeing him. Not as a disappointment or a project or an extension of his own ambitions, but as a scared child who needed his father to listen. "Jacob," he whispered, and his voice broke on the name. I thought I was doing what was best. I thought, but whatever he thought was lost as the plane's wheels touched down with a jolt, as the cabin filled with the sound of landing, the grinding of brakes, the shift of luggage in overhead compartments, as reality rushed back in and the moment passed. Zara used the distraction to slip through the curtain, back to her seat in economy. Her hands were still shaking now that it was over, now that the adrenaline was fading and leaving her feeling hollow and strange. The woman next to her was fully awake now, staring at her with open curiosity and something that might have been respect. "What happened up there?" she asked. "I heard shouting." "Nothing," Zara said quietly, tucking Dr. Ockafer's card carefully into her pocket. "Just helped someone." She looked down at her hands, at the calluses on her palms from doing dishes and laundry at the foster home, at the scar on her thumb from where she'd cut herself opening a can because they didn't have an electric opener. These hands had just saved someone's life. These hands that the boy's father had looked at with such contempt. The plane taxied to the gate. Passengers stood up, stretching, gathering their bags, pulling carry-ons from overhead compartments, already forgetting the drama from moments ago, already moving on to whatever came next. But as Zara waited for her turn to deplane, she noticed Dr. Ockafer waiting in the aisle, watching. The father emerged from first class, his son's hand gripped tightly in his. The boy looked exhausted, hollowed out, but calmer. His eyes were red from crying. As they passed Zara's row, the father stopped. For a long moment, he just stood there, and Zara could see him struggling with something. Pride, maybe, or shame. Or the simple difficulty of admitting you were wrong when you'd spent your whole life being told you were right. The words seemed to cost him something. "Thank you," he finally said, not quite meeting her eyes. "For helping Jacob, for seeing what I couldn't." Zara nodded. She didn't trust herself to speak. The father reached into his wallet and pulled out several bills, hundreds. "For your trouble," he said, holding them out. "I don't want your money," Zara said quietly. "Everyone wants money, not from you. Not for this." His jaw tightened, and she could see the offense register, the instinct to insist, to turn his gratitude into another transaction where he held the power. But then his son tugged on his hand, and he looked down and seemed to remember why they were having this conversation at all. "I'm sorry," he said, and this time he did meet her eyes. "For what I said, for how I treated you. You were right and I was wrong, and I'm sorry." It wasn't eloquent, it wasn't enough, but it was something. "Your son should see someone," Zara said. "A therapist, someone who can help him with the anxiety. Panic attacks like that don't just happen. They build over time." And if you send him away when he's this scared, it'll only get worse. The father nodded slowly. I'll make some calls. Then he and Jacob moved on, disappearing into the crowd of deplaning passengers. And Zara wondered if he really would make those calls, or if the moment would pass, and he'd go back to solving his problems with money and boarding schools, and the comfortable assumption that his way was the right way. Dr. Akafer was the last to leave first class. She stopped at Zara's row and waited while Zara gathered her single small backpack, the one that held everything she owned in the world. 3 changes of clothes, a toothbrush, the photograph of her grandmother from before the sickness when she still stood straight and tall and smiled with her whole face. The Bible with the note tucked inside. "Walk with me?" Dr. Akafer asked. They moved through the terminal together, an odd pair that drew curious glances from other travelers. The older woman in pearls and the young girl in a too-big jacket. They passed businessmen barking into phones, families reuniting with squeals and crushing hugs, flight crews pulling their regulation luggage toward their next departure. "Where are you headed, Doctor?" Akafer asked. "Foster home in Decatur. And before that, Miami?" "Yes, ma'am, my grandmother passed away. I was there for," Zara's voice caught, "for the end, Doctor." Akafer was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke again, her voice was soft. "I'm sorry for your loss. Losing the person who raised you, who believed in you, that's a grief that doesn't have words." "Thank you." They walked past shops selling overpriced snacks and magazines. Past gates where other planes were boarding, other people starting other journeys. The airport was a river of humanity, everyone flowing toward somewhere else, somewhere better, somewhere that might finally feel like home. "Your grandmother taught you well," Dr. Akafer said. "What you did on that plane, that was remarkable. Not just the knowledge, but the composure, the confidence, the ability to stay calm when everyone else was panicking. Most adults would have hesitated, they would have doubted themselves, but you didn't. She used to say that hesitation costs lives. She was right. In medicine, in life, hesitation can be the difference between saving someone and losing them." Dr. Akafer stopped walking. They'd reached the baggage claim, where people crowded around the carousel, waiting impatiently for their possessions to appear on the belt. "Zara, I'd like to offer you something." "An opportunity." Zara's grip tightened on her backpack strap. "I'm 12, I can't work. Not a job, a mentorship." Dr. Akafer pulled out her phone, typed something quickly with practiced efficiency. "I run a program at the hospital for promising students interested in medicine. We provide training, exposure, hands-on experience with real doctors and real patients. It's competitive. Very competitive. We get hundreds of applications every year and only accept 20 students, but I think you'd be a perfect fit. I don't have money for, it's fully funded. Transportation, meals, supplies, everything. We have donors who believe in identifying talent early and nurturing it." Dr. Akafer met her eyes. "I saw something on that plane, Zara. Not just knowledge, but calling. Your grandmother gave you a gift, a real gift. The question is what you're going to do with it." Zara felt something crack open in her chest. Something that had been locked tight for months, maybe years. Something that felt dangerously like hope, and hope was dangerous because when you hoped for things and didn't get them, the disappointment could break you. "Why me?" she whispered. "You don't know me, I could be anyone. Because you stepped up when no one else would. Because you saw past fear and pride and doubt and did what needed to be done. Because you were dismissed, insulted, and told you didn't belong and you did it anyway." Dr. Akafer's expression was gentle but firm. "Because the world needs more people like you. And I'm tired of watching talented kids slip through the cracks just because they don't have the right last name or the right zip code or the right skin color. I'm tired of potential going to waste because no one bothered to look past the surface." She held out her phone, showing a form on the screen. "I'll need your foster parents' information. Permission to enroll you in the program. But if you want this, Zara, if you really want this, I'll make it happen. I give you my word." Zara thought about her grandmother's shaking handwriting. "You are stronger than you know." She thought about the basement room in Decatur, about the pitying looks from the foster parents' biological children, about the whispered conversations she wasn't supposed to hear about, that poor girl and how long she'd be staying. She thought about Jacob's father, about the way he'd looked at her like she was nothing, like she was less than nothing. like her presence in first class was somehow an offense against the natural order of things. She thought about Jacob's face when he could finally breathe again, when the panic had released its grip, and he'd looked at her with gratitude and recognition, had seen her as a person who'd helped him instead of a symbol of everything he'd been taught to dismiss. "Okay," she whispered. "Yes, I want this." Dr. Akafor smiled, and it transformed her entire face, made her look younger and lighter and full of a joy that came from making a difference. "Good. Give me your phone number. I'll call you tomorrow to set everything up. We'll need to meet with your foster parents, explain the program, get their authorization. It'll take a few weeks to process all the paperwork, but you can start in the spring semester." They exchanged information right there in baggage claim, surrounded by the noise and chaos of hundreds of travelers claiming their belongings and rushing toward their next destination. Dr. Akafor's ride appeared a few minutes later, a sleek black car with a driver who hopped out to open her door with practiced efficiency. Before she got in, she turned back to Zara one more time. "That man on the plane," she said. "The boy's father, he looked at you and saw someone worthless, someone beneath him. Someone who didn't deserve to be in his space or touch his child or have opinions about anything that mattered." She paused, her dark eyes holding Zara's. "Do you know what I saw?" Zara shook her head, not trusting her voice. "I saw a future doctor, maybe a great one. Maybe someone who'll change the field, who'll save thousands of lives, who'll teach the next generation and leave the world better than she found it." Doctor. Akafor's smile was fierce now, full of certainty. "Don't ever let anyone make you forget that. Don't ever let anyone make you small." Then she was gone, the car pulling away into the bright Atlanta afternoon, leaving Zara standing alone in baggage claim with a backpack, a business card, and a future that had appeared out of nowhere like a miracle she hadn't dared to pray for. She stood there for a long time after, watching people come and go, and none of them knew that they'd just witnessed a moment that would change everything. That would change not just one life but ripple outward, touching hundreds of lives, thousands maybe, in ways that couldn't yet be measured. Because that's how these things happen. Not with announcements or fanfare, not with cameras rolling or audiences applauding. Just a girl on a plane doing what needed to be done and someone with power who chose to see her instead of looking away. Just one moment, one choice. One act of courage that seemed small at the time, but would grow into something larger than anyone could have predicted. 3 months later, Zara would be spending every Saturday at Children's Hospital, shadowing doctors, learning procedures, absorbing everything like a sponge soaking up water. She'd be there when a teenager came in after a suicide attempt, and she'd hold his hand while they stitched the wounds, and she'd tell him that things could get better. That she knew it didn't feel that way now, but she was living proof that one person seeing your worth could change everything. 6 months after that, she'd be featured in a local news story about young medical prodigies, and the story would go viral, and donations would pour into Dr. Akafor's mentorship program, expanding it to serve twice as many students. A year after the plane, she'd meet Jacob again at a hospital fundraiser. He'd be doing better, seeing a therapist twice a week, attending a local private school instead of the boarding school his father had chosen for him. His father would be there too, and he'd apologize properly this time with his wife standing beside him. With the humility of a man who'd learned that money can't buy decency or wisdom, or the ability to see past your own prejudices. But even that wasn't the point. The point was that moment on the plane when Zara chose to stand up. When she chose to push through that curtain even though she knew she wasn't wanted there, knew she'd be judged and dismissed, and told to go back where she belonged. When she chose to act instead of staying small and invisible and safe. Because there are moments in this life when you have a choice. When you can see someone suffering and turn away, telling yourself it's not your problem, not your responsibility, not your place to get involved. Or you can step forward even though you're scared. Even though you're just a kid. Even though the world has told you 1,000 times in 1,000 ways that you don't matter, that you're not enough. That people like you should stay in your lane and be grateful for whatever crumbs fall your way. And in those moments, what you choose defines everything that comes after. Zara chose to step forward. And because she did, because she refused to let fear or prejudice or poverty tell her what she was capable of, everything changed. not just for her. For Jacob, who got the help he needed and learned that vulnerability wasn't weakness. For his father, who had to face the ugliness of his own assumptions and choose whether to grow from it or harden around it. For every passenger on that plane who witnessed what happened and maybe, just maybe, thought twice the next time they were tempted to dismiss someone based on their appearance, their age, the price of their clothing. For Dr. Akafer, who'd been looking for someone worthy of her grandmother's legacy and found it in a 12-year-old girl in a too-big jacket. We walk past miracles every day. Past kids with brilliant minds trapped in failing schools because the funding follows the property taxes. Past teenagers with healing hands working minimum wage jobs because no one ever told them they could be doctors. Past potential that never gets the chance to bloom because the world has already decided it's not worth the investment. Has already written them off based on their zip code or their last name or the color of their skin. But sometimes, if we're paying attention, if we're brave enough to look past our own prejudices and see people for who they really are instead of what we assume about them, we get to witness something extraordinary. We get to see someone save a life at 30,000 feet. We get to see a girl in a too-big jacket become a doctor, a healer. A reminder that greatness doesn't care about your bank account, or whether you fly first class or economy, or whether people think you belong in their space. Zara's grandmother was right. Knowledge is the only inheritance that matters. The only thing they can't take from you, can't tax or steal or diminish. And when you use that knowledge not just for yourself but for others, when you step up when everyone else is stepping back, when you refuse to let anyone make you small, you become part of something bigger than yourself. You become proof that one person, one choice, one moment of courage can change everything. That a child can have more wisdom than adults twice her age. That dignity has nothing to do with money. That the people we dismiss might be the ones we need most. And that sometimes, in the space between fear and action, between staying silent and speaking up, between accepting the world as it is and insisting it can be better, we find out who we really are. Zara found out that day on the plane, and she never forgot it.